The dust kicked up under Prudence Vance's boots as she hurried down the main street of Great Bend, Kansas. The year was 1875, and the sun beat down on her worn shawl as she clutched her swollen belly. 6 months along, and showing enough that the whispers followed her like shadows. She kept her head down, trying to ignore the sidelong glances from the townspeople who had once greeted her warmly when she'd arrived to teach at the schoolhouse last fall. "There she goes," she heard Mrs. Watkins mutter to the general store owner. "Unmarried and in the family way. Shameful." Prudence quickened her pace, her fingers trembling as she reached for the door of the boarding house where she'd been staying. For how much longer, she didn't know. Mrs. Hollister, the owner, had made it clear that having a woman of questionable virtue under her roof was becoming problematic for business. She had just reached the porch when the mail coach thundered into town, bringing with it a cloud of dust and the usual excitement. Prudence paused, her hand on the railing. The letters from back east had stopped coming months ago when her family had learned of her condition. Still, hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps someone had written. The coach door swung open and a tall figure stepped down. His boots hit the dirt with purpose, and even from a distance, Prudence could see the set of his broad shoulders beneath a weather-worn duster. The stranger adjusted his hat, revealing a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. He surveyed the town with sharp eyes, and for an instant they locked with hers. Prudence quickly looked away and hurried inside. Behind the closed door of her small room, she sank onto the narrow bed and pressed her hands to her face. 6 months ago, she had been happy. Teaching the children of Great Bend had fulfilled her in ways she hadn't expected when she'd left Philadelphia. Then Charles Blackburn had arrived, charming and handsome, with tales of Boston and promises of marriage. By the time she realized he was already married with a family back east, it was too late. The child within her was proof of her foolishness. A knock at her door startled her. "Miss Vance, there's someone asking after you downstairs." Mrs. Hollister's voice was tight with disapproval. Fear gripped Prudence. Had Charles returned? Or worse, had he sent someone to deal with her problem? "Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Says his name is Patrick O'Malley, claims to be a relative." Prudence frowned. She had no relatives by that name. Curiosity overriding caution, she smoothed her dress and made her way downstairs. In the small sitting room stood the man from the coach, his hat now in his hands, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes, a striking shade of green, found hers immediately. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice deep and tinged with the hint of an Irish accent. "I apologize for the unexpected visit." Mrs. Hollister hovered nearby, clearly intending to eavesdrop. "Perhaps we could speak privately," the stranger suggested, glancing at the landlady. "You may use the parlor," Mrs. Hollister said reluctantly. "Door stays open." The man, Patrick O'Malley, followed Prudence into the small parlor. Once they were seated, he leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I'm not actually your relative, Miss Vance. I'm here on behalf of Charles Blackburn." Prudence's blood ran cold. "Has he sent you to make arrangements?" Her hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. The man's eyes widened and he shook his head quickly. "No, madam, nothing like that. I'm here because Charles Blackburn is dead." The words hung in the air between them. Prudence felt light-headed suddenly. "Dead? How?" "Train accident near St. Louis 3 weeks ago. Before he died, he confessed certain things." Patrick's eyes flickered to her midsection. "He asked me, as his friend, to find you and make sure you and the child were provided for." Prudence let out a bitter laugh. "Now he wants to provide, after leaving me to face the shame alone." "He was a coward," Patrick agreed, surprising her. "But he did leave funds, and a letter." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. With trembling fingers, Prudence took it. Charles's familiar scrawl addressed it to her. She tucked it into her pocket, unable to read it in front of this stranger. "The money? I don't want his money," she interrupted. "Miss Vance, forgive my directness, but you appear to be in a difficult situation. The funds could help you and your child start somewhere new, where no one knows your past." Before she could respond, the front door of the boarding house burst open. A group of women from the town's Ladies' Moral Society entered, led by Millicent Parker, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of the town's virtue. "Mrs. Hollister," Millicent called out, her voice carrying, "we've come to discuss the matter of your tenant." Patrick glanced at Prudence, noting how she paled. He stood, positioning himself between her and the doorway. "Ladies," Mrs. Hollister greeted nervously, "I wasn't expecting a visit today." "This couldn't wait," Millicent insisted. "It concerns Miss Vance's continued presence in our community." Prudence rose shakily to her feet. She'd known this was coming but had hoped for more time. "Miss Vance is my cousin," Patrick's voice rang out as he stepped into the hallway. "I've just arrived from Boston to escort her back home." 5 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. "And you are?" Millicent asked, suspicion evident in her tone. "Patrick O'Malley, madam." He tipped his head politely. "Miss Vance's family sent me to bring her home before her condition makes travel impossible." "I wasn't aware Miss Vance had family concerned for her welfare," Millicent said, her eyes narrowing. "We've only just learned of her situation," Patrick replied smoothly. "Family is family, Mrs. Parker. Millicent Parker. Mrs. Parker. I understand the delicate nature of these matters, but I can assure you that Miss Vance will be leaving Great Bend shortly." Prudence stood frozen, listening to this man she just met lie effortlessly on her behalf. "Well," Millicent said, clearly caught off guard, "I suppose if arrangements are being made." She glanced at her companions. "We'll leave you to your preparations then." After the women had departed, Prudence turned to Patrick. "Why did you do that?" "It seemed like the right thing to do," he shrugged. "Besides, it's partially true. I am here to help you leave if that's what you want." Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway. "I'd like you to vacate your room by the end of the week, Miss Vance. Relative or not, your situation has caused enough talk." Prudence nodded, fighting back tears. When the landlady had gone, she looked at Patrick. "I have nowhere to go." "I might have a suggestion," he said. "I own land about a day's ride from here. It's not much yet, just a small cabin and some acreage, but you'd be welcome there while you figure out your next steps." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be judged unfairly." He hesitated. "I also know what Charles was capable of. He wasn't always honest with women." Understanding dawned on Prudence. "This isn't the first time, is it?" "No," Patrick admitted, "but the others weren't expecting." Prudence sank back into her chair. "I have no right to impose on your kindness, Mr. O'Malley. It's no imposition. The cabin sits empty most of the time while I'm working cattle drives." He paused. "Think about it. You have until the end of the week to decide." After he left, Prudence pulled out Charles's letter. With shaking hands, she broke the seal. "My dearest Prudence," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be gone from this world. I cannot leave it without confessing my greatest sins, the worst of which I committed against you. I lied to you about everything: my unmarried status, my intentions, my feelings. The only truth was the child we created." Tears blurred her vision as she continued reading. Charles wrote of his regrets, his fears of his wife discovering his infidelities, and finally, his wish that the child would have a better life than he could provide. "I have entrusted Patrick with funds for you both. He is a better man than I ever was, and though I have no right to ask anything of you, I hope you will accept his help. It was his idea to find you when I confessed what I had done." Prudence set the letter down, her mind reeling. The man she had loved had never existed. And now a stranger, this Patrick O'Malley, was offering her shelter when her own family had abandoned her. She had 1 week to decide whether to trust him. The next morning, Prudence found Patrick at the livery stable, examining a sturdy-looking bay gelding. "Mr. O'Malley," she called softly. He turned, his expression brightening when he saw her. "Miss Vance, good morning." "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, getting straight to the point. "Before I decide, I'd like to know more about you," he nodded, gesturing toward a bench outside the stable. "That's fair." They sat, and for a moment, Patrick seemed to gather his thoughts. "I came to Kansas from Ireland 10 years ago after the war. Worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy my own land 3 years back. It's not much, but it's mine." His voice held pride. "I met Charles during a cattle drive to Chicago last year. We weren't close friends, but when he was dying—" Patrick trailed off. "He asked me to make things right with you. And the cabin you mentioned, it's small but solid. 2 rooms, I built it myself." He hesitated. "There's a creek nearby. Good water." Prudence studied him. There was an openness to his face that Charles had lacked, a steadiness in his gaze. "I accept your offer, Mr. O'Malley. Not permanently, of course. Just until I can make other arrangements." Relief washed over his features. "Of course, we can leave tomorrow if that suits you." "So soon?" "The sooner we're away from wagging tongues, the better for you, I'd think." He was right, of course. Already this morning she'd endured stares while buying bread at the bakery. "Tomorrow, then," she agreed. Patrick nodded. "I'll arrange a wagon. Your condition. The journey might be difficult on horseback." His consideration surprised her. Charles had never shown such thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said simply. The next morning dawned clear and warm for early May. Patrick arrived at the boarding house with a wagon, the back fitted with blankets to make the journey more comfortable. Mrs. Hollister watched from the porch, her lips pursed in disapproval, as Patrick loaded Prudence's 2 trunks. "Ready?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. "Yes." Prudence didn't look back as they pulled away from the boarding house. There was nothing in Great Bend she would miss, except the children she'd taught. As they passed the schoolhouse on the edge of town, a small figure darted into the road. It was Tommy Wilson, one of Prudence's students, a bright boy of 10 with a mischievous streak. "Miss Vance," he called, running alongside the wagon. "Are you really leaving?" Patrick slowed the horses. "I'm afraid so, Tommy," she replied, her heart aching at the boy's crestfallen expression. "But who'll teach us now? Old Mr. Peterson just makes us copy from books all day." Prudence reached out to touch his shoulder. "Sometimes we have to move on, even when we don't want to. But you keep reading those adventure books you love so much, promise?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "I promise." He glanced at Patrick. "Is he your husband now?" The innocent question caught her off guard. Before she could formulate an answer, Patrick spoke. "I'm just helping Miss Vance reach her destination safely, young man." Tommy looked dubious but didn't press further. "Will you come back someday, Miss Vance?" "I don't know, Tommy. Perhaps." The boy finally stepped back, allowing them to continue. As they left Great Bend behind, Prudence felt both relief and trepidation. She was leaving the only place she'd made her own, heading into an uncertain future with a man she barely knew. They traveled in comfortable silence for much of the morning, the wagon following a well-worn trail westward. By midday, the sun was high, and Patrick suggested they stop to rest and eat. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The simple contact reminded Prudence how long it had been since anyone had touched her with kindness. Since her condition had become visible, people had avoided her as if her shame might be contagious. Patrick spread a blanket in the shade of a large oak tree and unpacked bread, cheese, and dried apples. They ate quietly, the spring breeze rustling the new leaves overhead. "May I ask you something, Mr. O'Malley?" Prudence finally broke the silence. "Patrick, please. And yes, you may. Why did you really come for me? Charles and our involvement was brief. You owed him nothing." Patrick was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "When I was 17, my sister found herself in a similar situation to yours. The man responsible abandoned her. Our father threw her out." His jaw tightened. "She died trying to rid herself of the child." Prudence's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. But when Charles told me about you, all I could think of was Kathleen and how different things might have been if someone had helped her." He looked at her directly. "I couldn't save my sister, but perhaps I could help you." The raw honesty in his voice moved her. For the first time since Charles's betrayal, Prudence felt something besides fear and shame, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. They resumed their journey, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Patrick told her about his land, the small herd of cattle he was building, his hopes to expand someday. Prudence found herself speaking of her childhood in Philadelphia, her dreams of being a teacher, the disappointment of her parents when she chose to head west. "They wanted me to marry the son of my father's business partner," she explained. "A suitable match, they called it. But I wanted more than suitable. I wanted adventure, purpose. And you found it teaching. Yes, those children." She smiled at the memory. "They made every day an adventure." By late afternoon, the landscape had changed. The flat plains gave way to gentle rolling hills, dotted with cottonwoods and elms along the creeks. The wagon turned onto a less traveled road, then finally onto what was little more than a trail through tall grass. "Almost there," Patrick said as they crested a small hill. Below them lay a modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of trees, a small barn beside it. A creek wound its way past the property, catching the late afternoon sun. It was simple but undeniably beautiful. "This is yours?" Prudence asked, taking in the peaceful scene. "All of it?" 160 acres. Pride filled his voice. "It's not much compared to the big cattle operations, but it's a start." He guided the wagon down to the cabin. Up close, Prudence could see that, while simple, the structure was solidly built. A small porch fronted the cabin, with a rocking chair set to catch the evening breeze. Patrick helped her down and unlocked the door. "It's been empty a while. Might need some airing out." The interior was sparse, but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair by the fire. A doorway led to a smaller bedroom with a bed frame waiting for a mattress. "You'll take the bedroom," Patrick said, noting her examination. "I've brought a mattress in the wagon. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I can't put you out of your own bed," Prudence protested. "You're not. I'm usually in the bunkhouse with the hands when I'm at the flying. Oh, that's my ranch a few miles west of here." This place was meant to be a starter home, but I've been too busy to use it much. Before Prudence could argue further, he went outside to unload the wagon. She followed, insisting on helping despite his objections that it was too much in her condition. "I'm with child, Mr. O'Malley, not made of glass," she said firmly, taking a bundle of linens from his arms. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Patrick," he reminded her. "Patrick," she conceded. By sundown, they had the cabin habitable, the bed made up, provisions stored, and a fire crackling in the hearth. Patrick prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, apologizing for the plain fare. "It's delicious," Prudence assured him, realizing she was genuinely hungry for the first time in weeks. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the day's exertions catching up with them. Outside, night creatures began their evening symphony: crickets, frogs from the nearby creek, and owls' distant call. "It's peaceful here," Prudence murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. "That it is one of the reasons I chose it." Patrick added another log to the fire. "You should rest. It's been a long day." She nodded, suddenly too tired to argue. In the small bedroom, she changed into her nightgown, her hands automatically moving to cradle her swollen belly as the baby stirred within her. "We're going to be all right," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The next morning, Prudence woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in one of her looser dresses and emerged to find Patrick at the stove. "Morning," he greeted her. "Coffee, please." She accepted the cup gratefully. "You're up early." Habit from ranch life. He dished up a plate of eggs and handed it to her. "I need to ride to the flying-o today. I've been away nearly 2 weeks and my foreman will be wondering where I am." Disappointment flashed through her, followed by a surge of panic at the thought of being left alone. "I see." "I'll be back by nightfall," he added, noting her expression. "Unless you'd rather come along. It's only an hour's ride, but it might be tiring in your condition." "I'll stay," she decided. "The journey yesterday was exhausting enough," he nodded. "There's plenty of food and the creek has good drinking water if the pump gives you trouble." He hesitated. "Will you be all right alone?" "I've been alone for months now, Mr. O'Malley." "Patrick," he corrected gently. "Patrick," she repeated, a small smile forming despite herself. After breakfast, he saddled the bay gelding. Before mounting, he handed her a small revolver. "You know how to use this." Prudence took it gingerly. "My father taught me once, but that was years ago." Patrick showed her how to check if it was loaded, where the safety was, and how to aim. "Just in case," he said. "Though the only visitors out here are likely to be deer or maybe a curious coyote." She nodded, hoping she wouldn't need to use it. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, swinging into the saddle. Prudence watched him ride away, feeling strangely bereft once he disappeared over the hill. Turning back to the cabin, she decided to make herself useful. Despite her condition, she swept the floor, washed the breakfast dishes, and arranged her few belongings. By midday, the cabin was as homey as she could make it with limited resources. Outside, the day was warm and inviting. Prudence found a shady spot by the creek and sat on a large, flat rock, her feet dangling in the cool water. The peacefulness was a balm after weeks of enduring judgmental stares and whispers. Her hand moved to her belly as the baby shifted. "What will become of us?" she whispered. The letter from Charles lay folded in her pocket. She'd read it several times now, searching for any genuine remorse in his words, any real comfort. All she found was the desperate confession of a dying man trying to ease his conscience. A sound in the distance made her look up sharply. A rider was approaching from the direction opposite from where Patrick had gone. Prudence scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. She hurried back to the cabin, closing and barring the door behind her. The revolver Patrick had left was on the table. She grabbed it with shaking hands. Through the small window, she watched as the rider came closer. It was a woman, middle-aged and sturdy-looking, riding a dappled mare. She reined in her horse outside the cabin. "Hello," the woman called. "Anybody home?" Prudence hesitated, her finger on the trigger. "Patrick O'Malley, if you're hiding in there, you'd better come out. I brought those seedlings you asked for." Relieved, Prudence set down the revolver and unbarred the door. She opened it cautiously. The woman's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Well, you're certainly not Patrick O'Malley." "No, I'm Prudence Vance. Mr. O'Malley has allowed me to stay here for a while." The woman studied her, taking in her condition with a glance that held curiosity but not judgment. "I'm Martha Wilson. My husband and I farm about 3 miles east of here." She dismounted with practiced ease. Patrick mentioned he'd be bringing a guest when he stopped by yesterday, but he didn't mention you were expecting. Prudence tensed, waiting for the inevitable disapproval. Instead, Martha smiled warmly. I brought some tomato seedlings and herbs for planting. Patrick mentioned you might want to start a kitchen garden. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out several small plants wrapped in damp cloth. Thought you might like some company, too. Gets lonely out here. Overwhelmed by the woman's matter-of-fact kindness, Prudence felt tears spring to her eyes. Thank you, she managed. Please come in. Martha followed her inside, setting the seedlings on the table. Been married 30 years next month, she said conversationally. 5 children, 3 grandchildren so far. She glanced at Prudence's midsection. When are you due? August, the doctor thought. First one's always the hardest, Martha said sympathetically. My Rebecca came early, nearly had her in the cornfield. She chuckled at the memory. Prudence didn't correct her assumption that she was married. It was easier to let it stand. Patrick's a good man, Martha continued. Known him since he came to these parts. Hard-working, honest. He's been very kind, Prudence agreed carefully. Martha's eyes softened. World needs more kindness, don't you think? Too many folks ready to cast stones. She patted Prudence's hand. Now, how about I show you how to plant these seedlings before I head back? They spent the next hour digging a small garden patch at the side of the cabin. Martha was full of practical advice about gardening, childbirth, and surviving the harsh Kansas winters. By the time she mounted her horse to leave, Prudence felt more at ease than she had in months. Don't be a stranger, Martha called as she rode away. Come by any time. We're the farm with the red barn. Prudence waved until Martha was out of sight. The encounter had left her feeling both heartened and confused. Here was a woman who, upon finding an unmarried pregnant stranger in a man's cabin, had responded with kindness instead of condemnation. The sun was beginning its descent when she heard another horse approaching. This time she recognized the rider immediately. Patrick was returning as promised, leading a packhorse laden with supplies. You've been busy, he remarked, noticing the newly turned garden patch as he dismounted. Martha Wilson stopped by with seedlings. She said you asked her to bring them. Patrick nodded, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. Thought you might want something to do. Growing things can be healing. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. Thank you. It was good to have company. Martha's a fine woman, salt of the earth. He began unloading the packhorse. I've brought some things from the ranch: flour, sugar, coffee, some dried meat, and this. He pulled out a small wooden cradle. Prudence gasped softly. Where did you get that? Made it myself a while back. Practice, really. Never had a use for it until now. He set it down carefully on the porch. It's not fancy, but it'll serve. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the care that had gone into its making. It's beautiful. There's more inside. Patrick indicated the bundles still on the horse. Clothing mostly. Some of it was my sister's. Saved it all these years, don't know why. Might need taking in or letting out. Prudence helped him carry everything inside, marveling at his foresight. There were baby clothes, blankets, even a few books. You've thought of everything, she said, overwhelmed by his generosity. Just trying to make things comfortable for you, he replied, looking slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. The men at the ranch send their regards, by the way. Told them I had a cousin staying at the cabin for a spell. They didn't ask questions. Thank you for that, for all of this, he nodded, turning away to hide his expression. I should see to the horses. That night, after another simple but satisfying meal, they sat on the porch watching the fireflies emerge in the gathering darkness. The air was warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Will you return to the ranch tomorrow? Prudence asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "No. Thought I'd stay a few days, help you get settled." He glanced at her. "If that's all right, of course. It's your home." He looked out across the darkening land. "Always wanted a real home, not just a place to sleep, but somewhere that feels right." He shook his head slightly. "Never quite managed it. This place could be that," she offered. "It has good bones, as my mother would say." A half-smile tugged at his mouth. "Perhaps." They fell silent again, listening to the night sounds. Prudence felt a strange contentment settling over her. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Patrick stayed at the cabin, making repairs he'd long neglected, fixing the leaky roof, reinforcing the porch railing, building a proper chicken coop, in anticipation of the hens he promised to bring from the main ranch. Prudence tended her small garden, prepared their meals, and began transforming the sparse cabin into something resembling a home. They talked easily, sharing stories of their pasts as they worked side by side. Prudence learned that Patrick had come to America at 16, worked his way across the country, fought briefly in the war, then found his calling with cattle. He spoke little of his family in Ireland, except to say they had died in the famine years. In turn, she told him of her sheltered upbringing in Philadelphia, her father's importing business, her mother's determination to see her well married. She spoke of her rebellion in becoming a teacher and her decision to head west. "I wanted adventure," she admitted one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. "I thought I was so worldly, so prepared for anything." "And then Charles Blackburn happened," Patrick said quietly. She nodded, her fingers stilling on the peas. "I was a fool. You were trusting." "There's a difference." His defense of her warmed something deep inside. They worked in companionable silence until the peas were done. "I should ride to the Flying O tomorrow," Patrick said as they went inside. "Been away too long." Disappointment flickered through Prudence, though she knew he couldn't stay forever. This wasn't his life sitting on porches making a home. He was a rancher with responsibilities. "Of course," she said lightly. "I'll be fine here." He studied her face. "You could come along, meet everyone. Might do you good to see more than these four walls and the creek." The idea was tempting. "Are you sure it wouldn't cause talk? Anyone who works for me knows better than to gossip." His tone held a hint of steel. "Besides, you're my cousin, remember." The next morning, they set out on horseback, Patrick insisting she ride his gentlest mare while he took a spirited Mustang he was training. The ride was pleasant, the land opening up around them as they followed a well-worn trail westward. "There it is," Patrick said after about an hour, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "The Flying O." The ranch was larger than Prudence had imagined, a substantial main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals spread across a valley with a creek running through it. Cattle grazed on the hillsides, and several cowboys were visible working with horses in the corral. "You built all this?" she asked, impressed. "Started with just the bunkhouse and a dream," he replied. "Been adding to it year by year." As they rode into the yard, a tall, lanky man emerged from the barn. "About time you showed up, boss. Was beginning to think you'd run off to California." "Just taking some time at the cabin, Sam," Patrick replied easily, dismounting. "Sam Parker, meet my cousin, Prudence Vance. She'll be staying in the area for a while." Sam tipped his hat politely, his eyes lingering on her condition for just a moment before returning to her face. "Madam, welcome to the Flying O." Prudence returned the greeting, grateful for his discretion. Patrick helped her down from the horse. "Let me show you around." The main house was surprisingly comfortable, simply furnished but with touches that spoke of care. Curtains at the windows, braided rugs on the floors, a bookshelf filled with volumes ranging from practical manuals to poetry. "It's lovely," Prudence said, surprised. Hired a woman from town to come out once a week. Keep things in order, Patrick explained, seeming almost embarrassed by the compliments. Never here much to enjoy it, though. They spent the day at the ranch, with Patrick checking on operations while Prudence rested in the shade of the porch. The ranch hands were polite if curious, tipping their hats when they passed. By mid-afternoon, she'd met most of the 8 men who worked for Patrick, each treating her with a respect she'd almost forgotten existed. As they prepared to leave, Sam pulled Patrick aside for a quiet word. Prudence couldn't hear what was said, but Patrick's expression darkened momentarily before he nodded and walked back to her. "Everything all right?" she asked as they mounted up. "Fine. Just some business in town needs attending." His tone was light, but she sensed an underlying tension. They rode back to the cabin in silence, Patrick seemingly lost in thought. Only as they approached the cabin did he speak again. "I need to go into town tomorrow. Supply run," he said. "You're welcome to come along." Prudence hesitated. Great Bend held too many painful memories. "I think I'll stay here if that's all right," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be back before dark." That night, sleep eluded Prudence. She lay in the small bedroom, listening to Patrick's occasional movements in the main room as he too seemed restless. Something had changed today, but she couldn't pinpoint what. The next morning, Patrick left early, the wagon loaded with empty crates for supplies. Prudence watched him go, a nagging worry settling in her chest. She busied herself with chores, washing clothes in the creek, weeding her small garden, preparing a stew for dinner. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising a spring storm. She brought in the washing just as the first fat drops began to fall. The rain intensified quickly, turning into a downpour complete with thunder and lightning. Prudence stoked the fire against the sudden chill and sat in the rocking chair, trying to calm her growing anxiety as the hours passed with no sign of Patrick. It was nearly dark when she finally heard the wagon approaching. She rushed to the door, relief flooding through her, only to freeze at the sight that greeted her. Patrick was hunched over on the wagon seat, his shirt stained dark with what could only be blood. He managed to stop the horses before slumping sideways. "Patrick!" Prudence cried, rushing out into the rain. He looked up, his face pale beneath a day's growth of beard. "Just a graze," he mumbled as she reached him. "Got into a bit of trouble in town." With difficulty, she helped him down from the wagon and into the cabin. His left arm hung limply, blood seeping through his sleeve. "What happened?" she demanded, helping him to a chair. "Charles Blackburn's brother was in town," Patrick said through gritted teeth as she gently removed his coat. "Heard rumors about you, came looking. He's been tracking you since St. Louis." Fear gripped Prudence. "He found me, at the general store." Patrick winced as she cut away his shirt sleeve, revealing a deep gash across his upper arm. He was drunk, making threats about finding the woman carrying his brother's bastard. Prudence's hands trembled as she gathered clean cloths and a basin of water. "This needs stitching." Patrick nodded grimly. "There's whiskey in my saddlebag, and a needle and thread in the drawer." Working as quickly as her shaking hands would allow, Prudence cleaned the wound, which thankfully had mostly stopped bleeding. "What did you do?" she asked, preparing the needle, tried to reason with him, failed. Patrick took a long pull of whiskey before continuing. He pulled a knife. "I was quicker, but not quick enough to avoid this." He gestured to his arm. "Sheriff has him locked up now. You could have been killed," she whispered, beginning to stitch the wound. Patrick's jaw tightened against the pain. "Wasn't going to let him find you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Prudence focused on her task, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest at his words. When she finished stitching, she bound the wound with clean strips of cloth. "You need rest," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You've lost blood." Patrick looked at her, his green eyes intense despite his pallor. "He won't stop looking, Prudence. Not until he finds you. He blames you for Charles's death, says Charles was traveling to see you when the accident happened." A cold dread settled in her stomach. "What do we do?" "We could leave. Head further west, start fresh." He held her gaze. "I won't abandon you." The weight of his words pressed on her heart. "This isn't your burden to bear, Patrick. You've done more than enough already. It became my burden the moment I decided to help you." His voice was soft but determined. "Besides, I've grown rather fond of having you around." The simple admission caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on her own troubles, she hadn't considered that he might be developing feelings for her, or that she might be developing feelings for him. "Let's not decide anything tonight," she said finally. "You need to rest and I need to think." He nodded, allowing her to help him to the bedroom. "I'll take the floor," he insisted. "Don't be ridiculous. You're injured. Take the bed." After a brief argument which she won, Patrick settled onto the bed while Prudence made a pallet for herself by the fire in the main room. Sleep was long in coming for both of them. Morning brought clearer skies and difficult decisions. Patrick was feverish, the wound showing signs of infection despite Prudence's care. She bathed his brow with cool cloths, fed him broth, and changed the bandage, alarmed at the angry red streaks extending from the gash. "We need to get you to a doctor," she said firmly when his fever briefly subsided around midday. "Town's not safe," he mumbled, his eyes glassy. "Blackburn has friends. Then I'll go to the flying send someone for the doctor." He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Not alone." "Too dangerous." Prudence struggled with indecision. Patrick's condition was worsening, but she feared what might happen if she left him. Finally, as the afternoon waned with his fever still climbing, she made her choice. "I'm going for help," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could hear her in his delirium. "I'll be back as soon as I can." She saddled the mare, praying she remembered the way to the flying With a last glance at the cabin, she urged the horse forward, riding as fast as she dared in her condition. The journey seemed endless, each landmark unfamiliar in the fading light. Just as panic began to set in that she'd taken a wrong turn, she spotted the ranch buildings in the distance. Relief surged through her as she urged the tired horse toward them. Sam Parker was the first to spot her, running from the barn as she approached. "Miss Vance, what's wrong?" "It's Patrick," she gasped, sliding awkwardly from the saddle. "He's hurt, running a fever, needs a doctor." Sam's expression darkened. "Heard there was trouble in town. How bad is it?" "Knife wound to the arm. It's infected." He nodded grimly. "I'll send Jed for the doc and come with you." Within minutes, Sam and another ranch hand were mounted and ready, with Prudence insisting on leading them back despite their concerns for her condition. The return journey was a blur of anxiety, every minute that passed increasing her fear for Patrick. The cabin was dark when they arrived. Prudence lit lamps with trembling hands while Sam checked on Patrick. "Fever's high," he reported grimly. "But he's tough. Seen him through worse." They worked together to cool Patrick's fever, changing compresses and trying to get him to drink. By the time the doctor arrived near midnight, Prudence was exhausted, her back aching from bending over Patrick's still form. Dr. Miller, a gruff older man with kind eyes, examined the wound carefully. "Infection set in good," he muttered. "Need to clean it out, maybe take some stitches out to drain it. It's going to be painful." Prudence nodded, steeling herself. "What can I do?" "Hold him down if needed. And pray," the doctor added, reaching for his bag. The procedure that followed was brutal. Patrick, despite his weakened state, nearly came off the bed when the doctor began cleaning the infected wound. Prudence held his shoulders, murmuring soothing words as he thrashed and cried out. "That's the worst of it," Dr. Miller said finally, rebandaging the arm. "Now we wait. Keep the fever down. Make sure he drinks. If he makes it through the night, he's got a good chance." Prudence didn't leave Patrick's side, even after Sam and the doctor departed with promises to return in the morning. She bathed his face, spooned broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and prayed as the doctor had suggested. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, Patrick's fever broke. He opened his eyes clear for the first time in hours and found Prudence dozing in a chair beside the bed. "Prudence," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She jerked awake. "Patrick, how do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd." He attempted a smile. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." Relief made her almost giddy. "You're the one who nearly died. Takes more than a Blackburn to kill me." His expression sobered. "You went for help alone, didn't you, despite what I said?" "I had no choice. Your fever was too high." He closed his eyes briefly. "Brave woman." Prudence brushed the hair from his forehead, allowing herself the liberty in his weakened state. "Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." Recovery was slow. For the first few days, Patrick was too weak to leave the bed. Prudence cared for him with a tenderness that surprised them both, reading to him from the books he'd brought, discussing plans for the ranch, anything to keep his spirits up as his body healed. Sam rode out daily with news from the ranch and town. William Blackburn had been released from jail but had left Great Bend, supposedly heading back east. No one believed he'd given up his search, but at least there was breathing room. A week after the attack, Patrick was finally strong enough to sit on the porch. The early June day was perfect clear blue skies, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Prudence brought him coffee, settling into the chair beside him. "Sam says the cattle drive is on schedule," she reported. "They'll head out next week." Patrick nodded, frustration crossing his features. "Should be going with them." "You're barely on your feet. Sam can handle it." "I know," he sighed. "Just feel useless sitting here while others do my work." "You nearly died," Prudence reminded him gently. "Give yourself time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Finally, Patrick spoke again, his voice hesitant. "Been thinking about what happens after." After the baby comes, after you're well enough to travel." He kept his gaze on the distant hills. "You've mentioned going back east, maybe to your sister in Boston." Prudence hadn't seriously considered her future plans in weeks, too focused on the immediate needs of their situation. The thought of leaving the cabin, leaving Patrick, created a hollow feeling in her chest. "I don't know if that's what I want anymore," she admitted softly. He turned to look at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "What do you want, Prudence?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Before she could answer, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted the moment. Martha Wilson pulled up in front of the cabin, her face alight with friendly concern. "Heard about the trouble," she called, climbing down from the wagon. "Brought some of my healing salve and a pie." The moment broken, Patrick and Prudence welcomed their visitor. Martha fussed over Patrick's wound, approved of Prudence's caretaking, and filled them in on local gossip as they shared slices of her apple pie. "Town's been buzzing about you two," she said, watching them closely. "All sorts of stories flying around." Patrick frowned. "What kind of stories?" "Oh, the usual nonsense. Some say you're hiding out here because you're on the run. Others say your cousin isn't your cousin at all." Martha's gaze flicked to Prudence's growing belly. "Reverend Walsh is particularly concerned about the state of your souls." Prudence felt a familiar shame creeping up her neck. Patrick's hand found hers on the porch railing, his touch reassuring. "People will talk," he said evenly. "Let them." Martha smiled approvingly. That's what I told my Henry. Said it's nobody's business but yours what goes on out here. She gathered her things, preparing to leave. Though if you wanted to quiet the talk, there's always the obvious solution. After she'd gone, an awkward silence fell between them. The obvious solution hung unspoken in the air. She means well, Patrick finally said, still holding Prudence's hand. I know. Prudence hesitated. Patrick, about what you asked before, what I want. He waited, his expression guarded but hopeful. I want to stay, she said simply. Here with you, if that's what you want too. The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I want that more than anything. The weeks that followed were filled with a tentative joy. As Patrick regained his strength, they settled into a partnership that went beyond mere convenience. They worked together on the cabin, hanging proper curtains, building furniture, expanding the garden. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, occasionally reading aloud to each other from Patrick's small collection of books. Physical intimacy developed gradually. It began with casual touches, his hand at the small of her back, her fingers brushing his when passing a plate. Then came the gentle kiss on her forehead when she served breakfast, the way she straightened his collar before he rode to check on the ranch. They were learning each other, building trust slowly after all they'd been through. July brought sweltering heat and more frequent visits from Martha, who had appointed herself Prudence's unofficial midwife. She brought baby clothes, advice, and the occasional piece of gossip from town. William Blackburn's back, she reported one afternoon as she helped Prudence hang laundry. Saw him at the general store yesterday, asking questions about Patrick. Prudence nearly dropped the shirt she was hanging. Did he mention me? Not directly. Just wanted to know where Patrick's land was, said they had business. Martha's expression was grave. Henry told him to move along, that no one here would help him find trouble. That evening, Prudence relayed the news to Patrick. His face hardened, but he kept his voice calm. I'll talk to Sam, have the boys keep an eye out. Might be nothing. You don't believe that? No, he admitted. But I won't have you worrying in your condition. Prudence placed a protective hand on her belly. The baby's due in less than a month. What if he finds us before then? Patrick's jaw set determinedly. He won't. Despite his reassurances, Prudence couldn't shake her fear. That night, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, she broached the subject that had been on her mind since Martha's visit. There's something I need to tell you, she began hesitantly. About the baby. Patrick turned to her, concern etched on his features. Is something wrong? No, nothing like that. She took a deep breath. It's about what they're saying in town, about the child not being Charles's. Confusion crossed his face. I don't understand. There's a rumor that I lied about Charles being the father, that I'm making it up to protect someone else or to gain sympathy. The words tumbled out in a rush. Martha heard it from the Reverend's wife. Patrick's expression darkened. That's nonsense. Why would you lie about something like that? I wouldn't. But people believe what they want to believe. She twisted her hands in her lap. The thing is, when the baby comes, these rumors will only get worse. The child will grow up marked by scandal, just as I am. Prudence, he began, but she pressed on. I've been thinking about Martha's obvious solution, about what it would mean for the baby, for us. She finally met his gaze. If we were married, the child would have your name. A fresh start. Patrick was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Is that what you want? A marriage of convenience to protect the child? No, she admitted softly. That's not all I want. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Then tell me what you want, Prudence. All of it. I want a real marriage, with you. The admission left her breathless. These past months, I've come to care for you in ways I never expected, but I won't trap you into raising another man's child out of pity or obligation." Patrick moved his chair closer, taking both her hands in his. "Prudence Vance, if you think for one moment that pity or obligation is what I feel for you, then you haven't been paying attention." His voice was rough with emotion. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in Great Bend when you stood on that porch, looking like you might face down the whole world alone if you had to." Tears sprang to Prudence's eyes. "Patrick, let me finish." He squeezed her hands. "I don't care who fathered that child. From the moment it's born, as far as I'm concerned, it's mine. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to give it my name." Through her tears, Prudence whispered, "They said I lied about the child." Patrick brought her hands to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then he'll carry my name." The next morning they rode to Great Bend. Patrick insisted they take the wagon, concerned about Prudence's comfort so late in her pregnancy. The journey was tense, both vigilant for any sign of William Blackburn, but they reached town without incident. The stares began the moment they drove down the main street. Prudence held her head high, Patrick's steady presence beside her giving her strength. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, where Patrick explained the situation with William Blackburn and their concerns. "Haven't seen him since he left jail," Sheriff Davis said, scratching his beard. "But I'll keep an eye out, and congratulations on the upcoming nuptials." News traveled fast in small towns. By the time they reached Reverend Walsh's home, several curious onlookers had gathered on the street, watching as Patrick helped Prudence down from the wagon. The Reverend received them with poorly concealed disapproval, especially when Patrick explained their purpose. "You understand the circumstances are unusual," Reverend Walsh said, glancing at Prudence's condition. "The only thing unusual is how long it took me to convince this woman to marry me," Patrick replied smoothly. "We'd like the ceremony today if possible." The Reverend hesitated, but Patrick's steady gaze and the subtle reminder that the O'Malley Ranch contributed generously to the church's building fund eventually persuaded him. The ceremony was simple, just the two of them with the Reverend and his wife as witnesses. Prudence wore her best dress, a deep blue that somewhat disguised her condition, with wildflowers Patrick had picked that morning tucked into her hair. Patrick had shaved and wore a clean shirt and his best trousers, his eyes never leaving Prudence's face as they spoke their vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Walsh declared, still looking slightly uncomfortable. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Patrick kissed her gently, his hands cradling her face as if she were made of the finest porcelain. In that moment, Prudence knew that whatever had begun as an arrangement of necessity had transformed into something real and precious. They left the Reverend's home to find that the crowd outside had grown. To Prudence's surprise, not all the faces were hostile. Martha Wilson was there, beaming with approval. Tommy Wilson, Prudence's former student, pushed through the adults to present her with a slightly crushed bouquet of prairie flowers. "Are you coming back to teach us now, Miss Vance? I mean, Mrs. O'Malley," he asked hopefully. Prudence smiled, touched by the gesture. "Not right away, Tommy, but perhaps someday." They were just about to climb into the wagon when a commotion at the end of the street caught their attention. A man was pushing his way through the crowd, his face flushed with anger and drink despite the early hour. "O'Malley," he shouted. "I've been looking for you." Patrick stepped in front of Prudence protectively. "William Blackburn, heard you were asking after me." Blackburn was a shorter, stockier version of his brother, with the same charming features twisted now by rage. "You've been hiding her," he accused, pointing at Prudence. "The woman who killed my brother." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patrick remained calm. Your brother died in a train accident. Miss Vance had nothing to do with it. He was on his way to see her, Blackburn's voice rose. If she hadn't written to him, begging for money for her bastard, he'd never have been on that train, Prudence gasped. She had written no such letter. Charles had abandoned her without a backward glance. That's not true, she said, stepping up beside Patrick despite his attempt to keep her behind him. I never wrote to Charles after he left. Blackburn sneered. He showed me the letter before he left. Said he had to go make things right with Prudence. Now he's dead, and you're carrying on with this rancher like my brother meant nothing. Your brother meant nothing to me because he lied about everything, Prudence replied, her voice surprisingly steady. He was married. He never intended to return. Any letter he showed you was not from me. The crowd had grown silent, watching the confrontation with avid interest. You calling my brother a liar? Blackburn's hand moved toward his belt, where Prudence could see the outline of a gun. Sheriff Davis stepped forward. That's enough, Blackburn. We don't want trouble here. There's already trouble. Blackburn's eyes were fixed on Prudence's belly. That child she's carrying has Blackburn blood, and I aim to make sure it's raised proper, not by some Irish cattle herder. Patrick's posture changed subtly, tension radiating from him. The child is mine now, he said quietly. We were just married. He'll carry my name, not Blackburn's. You can't do that. Blackburn's face flushed darker with rage. It's done. Patrick's voice was implacable. Now I suggest you leave Great Bend and forget about us. For a moment, it seemed Blackburn might draw his gun, consequences be damned. Then the sheriff moved closer, hand on his own weapon. Several of the townsmen stepped forward as well, including Martha's husband Henry and the blacksmith, both solid men not easily intimidated. Think carefully, Blackburn, Sheriff Davis warned. You're outnumbered. The fight seemed to drain out of William Blackburn suddenly. He looked around at the unfriendly faces, then back at Patrick and Prudence standing united. This isn't over, he muttered, but he turned and pushed his way back through the crowd. The sheriff followed him. I'll make sure he leaves town, he called over his shoulder. The tension broken. People began to disperse, many stopping to congratulate the newly married couple with what seemed like genuine goodwill. The confrontation with Blackburn had somehow shifted public opinion in their favor. By the time they left Great Bend, Prudence felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer Miss Vance, the fallen schoolteacher. She was Mrs. O'Malley, wife of a respected rancher. Are you all right? Patrick asked as they left the town behind. She nodded, her hand finding his on the seat between them. Better than all right. I'm free. The journey home was peaceful, the rolling Kansas landscape golden in the afternoon sun. When they reached the cabin, their home now, Patrick surprised her by scooping her up in his arms. Patrick. What are you doing? I'm far too heavy in my condition, carrying my wife over the threshold, he replied with a grin, managing the steps with only a slight wince that betrayed the lingering weakness from his injury. It's tradition. Inside, he set her down gently, but didn't release her. Instead, he cradled her face in his hands, his expression suddenly serious. I meant what I said, Prudence. I love you. This isn't just about the baby or protecting you from Blackburn. I know, she whispered, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. I love you too. I think I have for longer than I realized. His kiss was tender at first, then deepened as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley. 2 weeks later, William Blackburn returned. Patrick had ridden to the Flying O, leaving Prudence with Martha for company. They were preparing dinner when they heard a horse approaching at speed. Martha looked out the window and paled. It's not Patrick, she said grimly. Get the shotgun. It's under the bed. Prudence did as instructed, her heart pounding. By the time she returned with the weapon, Martha had positioned herself by the door, a cast iron skillet in her hands. "If it's who I think it is, let me do the talking," Martha said firmly. "You stay back." The rider dismounted, and William Blackburn's voice called out, "I know you're in there. Come out and talk." Martha cracked the door open. "Mr. Blackburn, you're trespassing on private property." "I want to speak to the woman, alone." "That's not happening." Martha's voice was steel. "Mrs. O'Malley is in no condition for visitors, especially unwelcome ones." "Mrs. O'Malley," he spat. "That child she's carrying is a Blackburn. My brother's blood, I have rights." "You have no rights here," Martha retorted. "Now get back on that horse before my husband and Mr. O'Malley return. They went to check the north pasture, but should be back any minute." It was a lie Henry was at their farm miles away, but Blackburn had no way of knowing that. Still, he didn't move. "I'm not leaving without talking to her." "I'm here," Prudence said, moving to stand beside Martha, the shotgun visible in her hands. "Say what you came to say, then go." Blackburn's eyes narrowed at the sight of the weapon. "You think you can threaten me? That child is my nephew or niece, the last of my brother's blood. I won't have it raised by strangers." "I was never anything more to your brother than a diversion," Prudence replied steadily. "He lied to me, abandoned me, and now he's gone. This child is my husband's in every way that matters. You can't erase my brother that easily." "I'm not trying to erase him. I'm trying to give this child a future free from shame." Prudence's voice shook slightly. "What could you offer? A life being raised as the bastard nephew by an uncle who drinks too much and carries a grudge. Patrick will be a real father to this child." Blackburn's expression twisted. "You have no right." "She has every right," Martha interrupted. "Now leave before someone gets hurt." For a tense moment, it seemed he might refuse. Then the sound of approaching horses made him hesitate. "This isn't over," he growled. But he mounted his horse and rode away quickly. The approaching riders turned out to be Sam Parker and another ranch hand, coming to check on Prudence at Patrick's request. When they heard about Blackburn's visit, Sam insisted on staying until Patrick returned. "Boss would have my hide if I left you alone after that," he explained, settling into a chair on the porch, rifle across his knees. Patrick returned just before sunset, his expression thunderous when he heard the news. "He won't stop," he said grimly after Sam and Martha had left. "Not until he has what he wants." "What can we do?" Prudence asked, fear making her voice tight. Patrick paced the small room, thinking. "We could leave, start fresh somewhere he can't find us. Leave the ranch, your home. You've worked so hard for it. You and the baby are my home now." He stopped pacing, kneeling beside her chair. "I'd give up everything if it meant keeping you safe." Tears filled Prudence's eyes at his declaration. She placed his hand on her belly where the baby was kicking vigorously. "We're a family now, the three of us. I won't let fear drive us away from the life we're building." Patrick smiled, feeling the movement beneath his palm. "Strong little one." "Like his father," Prudence said softly, meaning Patrick. He looked up, his eyes bright with emotion. "I'll speak to the sheriff tomorrow, see about getting a restraining order. And I'll have the boys take turns keeping watch until the baby comes. After that, we'll figure it out together." The next days passed in tense anticipation, but William Blackburn didn't return. The sheriff reported that he'd been seen boarding a train east, presumably heading back to Boston. While Patrick didn't entirely believe the threat was gone, it allowed them to breathe a little easier as Prudence's time drew near. August arrived with sweltering heat. Prudence felt enormous and uncomfortable, ready for the baby to come. Patrick rarely left her side now, arranging for Sam to handle most of the ranch business. It was a particularly hot afternoon when Prudence felt the first pains. She'd been resting on the bed while Patrick repaired a loose floorboard in the main room. "Patrick," she called, a note of urgency in her voice. "I think it's time." He was at her side in an instant, his face a mixture of excitement and terror. "Are you sure? It's early." "Not that early." She grimaced as another pain gripped her. "And yes, I'm sure." Patrick moved with surprising efficiency, remembering everything Martha had instructed. He sent one of the ranch hands for the midwife and doctor, helped Prudence change into a clean nightgown, and prepared the bedroom as Martha had directed. By the time Martha arrived, the contractions were coming regularly. The older woman shooed Patrick from the bedroom despite his protests. "Men have no place in the birthing room," she said firmly. "Go pace the porch like every other expectant father." The hours that followed were the longest of Patrick's life. He heard Prudence's cries through the door, each one tearing at his heart. The doctor arrived as evening fell, nodding briefly to Patrick before entering the bedroom. Night deepened. The ranch hands who'd gathered to wait with their boss built a fire outside, passing a flask back and forth, sharing stories of other births they'd witnessed to pass the time. Patrick barely heard them, his attention fixed on the cabin door. It was nearly midnight when the baby's first cry pierced the night. The men around the fire cheered, slapping Patrick on the back as he stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sound. Martha emerged a short while later, her face tired but beaming. "You have a son, Patrick, healthy and strong with a fine set of lungs. And Prudence, tired but well, she's asking for you." The bedroom was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Prudence lay propped against the pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Patrick entered, her smile so full of love it nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet your son," she whispered as he approached the bed. Patrick sat carefully beside her, staring in awe at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he blinked his eyes open briefly, they were a deep blue. "He's perfect," Patrick breathed, reaching out to gently touch the downy head. "Would you like to hold him?" Prudence asked. With trembling hands, Patrick took the small bundle, marveling at how light yet substantial he felt. The baby squirmed, then settled against his chest. "What shall we name him?" Prudence asked softly. Patrick looked at her, his heart so full he could barely speak. "I thought maybe James, after my father, but it's your choice." "James Patrick O'Malley," Prudence tried the name out. "It sounds right." "It does." Patrick looked down at the child, his son, in every way that mattered. "Welcome to the world, James." As if recognizing his name, the baby's eyes opened again, fixing on Patrick's face with what seemed like solemn consideration. "He knows who you are," Prudence said, watching them together. "His father." The word filled Patrick with fierce joy and determination. This child, born of another man's blood but entrusted to his care, would know only love and acceptance. He would bear the O'Malley name proudly, grow up on the ranch, and never doubt his place in the world. "I love you both so much," Patrick said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me the family I never thought I'd have." Prudence reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And you've given us a home, safety, and your name when we needed it most." Outside, the ranch hands continued their celebration around the fire. Inside, the little family shared their first moments together, the past receding as they embraced their future. Word of James's birth spread quickly through the county. Visitors came bearing gifts and well wishes, neighbors, ranch hands, even some of the townspeople from Great Bend who had once whispered behind Prudence's back. The baby was universally declared to be the image of his father, which always brought a private smile to Patrick and Prudence's lips. Life settled into a new rhythm centered around James's needs. Patrick proved to be a natural father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was breaking horses. He often carried James against his chest in a sling Martha had fashioned, showing him the ranch, introducing him to the animals, talking to him constantly about everything they saw. "He's only 2 months old," Prudence would laugh. "He doesn't understand cattle breeding yet." "Never too early to learn the business," Patrick would reply with a wink. As autumn painted the prairie in golds and russets, they received word that William Blackburn had died in Boston. The letter came from a lawyer, explaining that Blackburn had succumbed to liver failure, a result of his heavy drinking. With him died any claim on James, any threat to their newfound happiness. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James sleeping peacefully in Prudence's arms, Patrick brought up something that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about the cabin." Prudence looked around at what had become their home over the past months. "What about it?" "It's getting too small for us. James will need his own room eventually, and maybe—" He hesitated, a smile playing at his lips. "Maybe we'll need more space for other little O'Malleys someday." Warmth flooded through Prudence at the thought. "What did you have in mind?" "I thought we might build onto it. Add a proper bedroom for James, maybe another for guests, a bigger kitchen for you." He took her hand. "Make it a real home, not just a place we ended up out of necessity." "I'd like that," she said softly. "This place has become special to me." "It's where everything changed." Patrick nodded, understanding. "We'll start in the spring. Do it right." As the days shortened and winter approached, they moved temporarily to the main house at the Flying O. It was more comfortable for the cold months, and Patrick needed to be closer to the ranch operations during the difficult winter season. Christmas brought their first real celebration as a family. They decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Patrick surprised Prudence with a small pine tree cut from their land. Though James was too young to understand the holiday, his wide-eyed wonder at the candlelit tree brought joy to them both. Patrick's gift to Prudence was a delicate gold locket containing a tiny photograph of James on one side and Patrick on the other. "So we're always with you," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Prudence's gift to him was a hand-knitted scarf and, more significantly, the news that she was with child again. "Already?" Patrick asked, astonished and delighted. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Martha confirmed it last week. I wanted to be sure before I told you. This one will be here by summer." Patrick gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "Another baby, a brother or sister for James." He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Is it too soon? Are you well?" "I'm perfectly well," she assured him, "and very happy." That night, as snow fell gently outside and James slept peacefully in his cradle, Prudence and Patrick lay in each other's arms, talking softly about the future they were building together. "Did you ever imagine, when you came looking for me in Great Bend, that we'd end up here?" Prudence asked, her head resting on his chest. Patrick's hand stroked her hair gently. "Not in my wildest dreams. I thought I'd find you, make sure you and the baby were provided for, and go back to my solitary life." He chuckled softly. "Shows what I know." "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. "Even if the circumstances were less than ideal. I'd find you again in any circumstances." He lifted her chin, meeting her gaze in the dim light. "You and the children are everything to me, Prudence. My home, my heart, my family." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Prudence marveled at how life could change so completely in the space of a year. From despair to hope, from shame to pride, from loneliness to this overwhelming love that filled every corner of her being. Outside, the Kansas winter wrapped the world in stillness. Inside, The warmth of family and the promise of tomorrow created a sanctuary neither of them had dared to dream possible. Their story, begun in whispers and secrets, had transformed into something beautiful and enduring, a love that would weather any storm, a family bound not by blood but by choice, and a future as vast and hopeful as the prairie sky.